And we welcome into the Oklahoman's video studio U.S. Representative Steve Russell. Sir, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Back in Oklahoma City for the weekend, right?
I am. It's good to be home. It's been a couple of weeks, so it's nice to get back.
What's the weather like in D.C.?
It's hot. It's not as brutal as what we've encountered here.
Do we really want to talk hot?
So although they have with the Potomac there a high humidity.
Gotcha. So it's pretty steamy hot there too.
Yeah. So it's but it's just hot. We've had a mild summer.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, here we are in the middle of July, late July, and it's still green in places, so we'll take it.
Agreed, same here. We've had just enough rain that it stays green, perhaps beyond what it usually would in Oklahoma City.
We've been pretty fortunate.
Well, the news cycle has certainly been quite fast, and
a lot going
I see
on.
You all over the place. Justin Winger there covers congressional matters for the Oklahoman. He's been in touch with you quite often.
Sure.
And I see your face and hear your voice on the national networks at all. Where to begin these days? Let's start with the Helsinki summit.
Sure.
Your thoughts. You're quoted as saying you were, that many of us quote, were taken aback by the embracing of Mr. Putin.
And that still holds true. I've sat in the classified briefings. I served in NATO missions.
As a member of
the
in
military,
the Army, you were deployed alongside NATO troops.
We don't need to have the security of Europe put in question, and here's why. We've not had 70 plus years of peace in Europe since Roman times. It's just astounding. Look what happened in the first half of the last century. We had tens of millions of people die every time Europe went into conflict. Are we so naive to think that that won't happen this century if we don't secure it? So we have to be longer range thinking with regard to our alliances. And NATO is a security alliance. It's not an economic alliance. You do that at the G7 summit, or do that at the EU, liaison or whatever. We're not a part of the EU, but you can't conflate the trade issues into the security alliance. It's just different. And then with regard to Mr. Putin, I've said on the classified hearings, there is no question in anybody's mind that Russia has tried to interfere with opinion in the United States, with creating all of these things that cause and foment division on social media. What looks like grassroots or groups or different. I mean, there's just no question about what they're doing. It's not just to the United States, it's all over. And with regard to trying to tamper with elections, you bet they're trying to affect outcomes. Now, do I think that they interfered with the integrity of the elections, where it would have had a different outcome at the ballot box? We found no evidence of that on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, fortunately. But it's a sharp reminder as we move forward to look to electronic, make all of our ballots electronic or computer-based, all of that. I'm pretty proud of Oklahoma with our paper ballots, because while it's not perfect, you're not going to cyber attack our election system. It's going to be with integrity.
I heard a story on NPR yesterday talking about that and about the value of paper balloting.
Absolutely. Now, people can pad ballots, or they can do different things. There's always been
vote early and vote often.
Yeah, exactly. How many in the cemetery got to vote? But we have good election laws in Oklahoma, and I just think before we move in a direction, we ought to keep these things in mind that we're experiencing. We don't want foreign actors to disrupt our election process. But Mr. Putin has tried to disrupt all of the Western allies, NATO. Look what they've done in London, using uranium and nerve agents to kill agents or innocents and trying to get the agents. There's just no question with the intelligence that's out there, and so we just can't go embrace it.
You say there's no question. We've had Senator James Lankford sit in that very seat and say the same thing.
Yeah. And he's on the Senate Intelligence Committee.
That there's no question. Yeah. Why do you think the president says something different and then walks it back, but then says something different?
I think, the president will have to speak for himself, which he seems to be struggling with here in the last few days on what he meant to say. Hopefully we'll get some clarity from the president on that. I think as an observer, he respects Mr. Putin. Okay, fine. He has maybe a connection with him on a personal level. Okay, fine. We've seen examples of American leaders and foreign leaders that, should not get along but end up doing. Oh, okay, we can accept all of that, but we can't ignore every aspect of our intelligence agencies. I mean, not just one, but all of them collectively. All of the directors and heads of our intelligence agencies coming out in unison saying, look, here, we have a problem. So that's why Congress is a separate and equal branch of government. We want to be supportive of the president and the initiatives that he's trying to take. We trust him constitutionally, any president with broad powers on foreign affairs. But when it comes to commerce, when it comes to treaties, the Constitution I read, those powers are not vested with the executive branch. They're vested with the Congress. And so I think that's why you're seeing a little bit of pushback.
You were quoted as saying, if the president continues to move in these directions, the legislative branch may exert itself more.
I think that, there's a lot of questions out there, not on what the president is trying to do to put America in a better or more secure position. I think intent-wise, most Americans like that. They may not, have a preference for his methods or anything like that, but in terms of what, trying to have America in a stronger position, okay, who wouldn't? But at the same time, you've got so many sectors of our economy. I met with a bunch of folks connected to Oklahoma's agriculture today, very, very concerned about the impact that trade wars are going to have on Oklahoma products, our wheat, our soybeans, our cattle. When so many of these things were really starting to take hold and find markets and move, and then now, doors are being closed. Americans are right to be concerned about these things.
I remember interviewing Oklahoma's ag secretary a few months ago and said, hey, what do you think about the new president? He was for, and his group was for those policies. You're hearing today, now maybe a result down the road, that some of the tariffs might not be so beneficial.
Well, for example, if you had open doors for certain products and markets to Asian countries that were willing to get their things from us, but now you have a trade war with Europe. I mean, we've been trading with the Dutch for, 400 years? It's like, literally. And so now you're seeing staunch allies like Japan setting trade agreements with staunch allies like Germany and France. And do you really think that those markets are going to, it's like, oh, okay, we'll change our policies. No, once those markets get established, it's going to be really tough for us to exert and establish ourselves in that. So we're watching it. We're watching it very closely. I don't have any issues with what the president is trying to do on bad actors. When you have nefarious players on trade, maybe the Chinese are trying to do some unfair things, or the Russians, or other countries. Okay, fine. For those that are doing the abuse, apply a little love. But those that are, Canada. We've not exchanged shots with Canada since 1814. Europe, we can work this out. So, anyway, I have faith in the American people, and I think that the president. One thing that I have seen the president do is that, he won't necessarily be stuck on only one position for any length of time if he doesn't think it serves his best interest. So we'll see where it goes.
Interesting. In fact, that's a phrase the president likes to use, right? We'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's true.
Or to paraphrase that somewhat. Do you trust the nation's intelligence agencies?
I do. And I'll tell you why I trust them. I trusted them with my life as a warrior on battlefields. I was sent into harm's way and on missions where it was their information that was sending me there. I have contributed to those intelligence agencies and services with information that I was getting and developing as a warrior. I do trust them. Are they perfect? No. Do they have flaws? Well, we're all human. Are they reliable? Absolutely. And so I just see the evidence, and if folks could see the things that we see in those intelligence briefings, yeah, there's no doubt, and that's why Senator Langford and I, can make those types of statements, and he takes even a deeper dive, being on the Senate Intelligence Committee, in my capacity on oversight and government reform, and on House Armed Services Committee, and all the foreign affairs I deal with. But yeah, we deal with a lot of it.
Chatting with U.S. Representative Steve Russell, a couple more questions for you. You mentioned immigration earlier. Your thoughts on that? You have suggested that lawmakers should work to secure the border, but also provide a permanent residency for Dreamers.
Well, not necessarily Dreamers per se, but those that have been in the Deferred Action Program, and there is a difference. Those that are registered, it's roughly 835,000. Some of those registrations have expired, but it's a known number and it's known people. They have Social Security numbers, all of that, and that would be the DACA group. I certainly support that we try to get to some solution from them. They're already in our system. I think it would be something that most Americans would support. There is some good news developing in terms of agriculture now. In my stands on some of these immigration issues, I didn't want to see our legal paths to immigration that would be curtailed. You're cutting 100,000 legitimate visas. The more legitimate paths that we cut out, it's only going to create worse illegal problems. So one of the things that we're working now, and we may actually see in the next week or so, is an agricultural provision where we kind of go back to what was known as the Bracera Accord, which was not a law that was passed, but it was an agreement that was done between the United States and Mexico during World War II to bring workers in under a guest worker program, and then they would work in the fields to help feed our troops overseas and work in the factories, when a labor force was gone. So those were important things, and it was so successful we continued it all the way to 1964 until Congress ended it. And then we began to do different things, and we saw a spike from that date on, 1965 in particular, to today, where we have an enormous illegal immigrant problem, or illegal alien problem. So I think in the agricultural pieces, we are looking at something now that would establish a start. Roughly 450,000 is a number I've heard of guest worker type visas to allow them to come and work the fields and work the labor market and some of that. And
was that more of a come and go situation?
Yes, it was.
Back before 65?
It was a come and go, and we didn't start seeing the spikes in illegal immigration until we began to cap it and to try to, because what happened were people were like, well, I'm not sure I'm going to make the quota. What if I don't? So I'll just stay. And they did. From 65 until the 1980s, when we tried to make some reforms, and had partial success, but we didn't get the border security, which we have to secure the border. I don't have any real issues with E-Verify in this agricultural construct, because if they are not citizens and they are coming here to work, we need the means to have that assurance and tracking, and I think that we could do that, and that would be successful. So what you may see is groups that were at loggerheads a month or two ago, and the political parties, we may actually get to solving some of our labor workforce problems in agriculture for the first time in, gosh, I don't know how long.
Well, speaking of labor workforce, what are your thoughts on the argument that immigrants are taking our jobs? Do you believe that, yes or no?
There is no empirical evidence that shows that in the agricultural market at all. In fact, As I had given a speech on the House floor, I laid out the history of the immigration, and one of the things I pointed out was a study with a economist who was looking at labor in North Carolina, specifically in agriculture. And they looked at it over a number of years, and what they found was that there was just no native-born way to fill those jobs. And for example, there were over 6,000 jobs available in 2012, and you had all kinds of people that were out of work in North Carolina, and then ended up what happening, only 247 applied out of the thousands of unemployed, and of the 247, only 7 finished the season. So that's why I made the comment on the House floor. You can either import workers or you can import food. And we do not want to import food. We have been the breadbasket of the world since anyone can remember, for generations. And we have to have a safe food supply. America's food is healthy and it is safe and it is well regulated with the Food and Drug Administration and all of that. We have confidence that when we go, and then if something gets out of whack, man, there, it's recalls and it's don't eat, this box of cereal, or don't eat, whatever. And we have consumer confidence because of that. How much confidence would you have if your food was coming from China or coming from parts of the world, that didn't have those types of standards? We got to be smart about this.
One last thing on this point, just because I see this quote from you, and so it's like I want to get the congressman's reaction to this. You said, Lady Liberty must continue to raise her arm and keep her torch burning brightly rather than exchange it for a stiff arm and a middle finger.
Right. Yeah, the founders of our country were not nativists. And I'm concerned that we don't need to become a nativist nation. And what do I mean by that? When you go back and look at the debates of our earliest fathers of the country and the framers of the Constitution, whether it was Washington or Jefferson, I mean, they came at things ideologically a little different. But on this, they agreed that the idea and the ideal of American government would be that it would be a government where we would give powers to it from the consent of the people, and those in government would draw it from the people, and that the people that would be welcome would be those that were willing to govern themselves, to live free, and to use their talents and skills. They would hold no titles. There would be no barons or land ownership. There would be no special set of skills or class that would make one American any more than any other. And you know what? That has been America for more than 2 centuries. And that's why I made those comments. We don't need to be that kind of country. And our framers were not that kind of country. They didn't look at it as that kind of country. In fact, they rejected this nativist approach, and they even used language of what they called encouragements, that they did not support an immigration system of encouragements. They wanted it to be, you come here and you believe in our ideals and our way of life, and you're willing to be governed by our set of standards and rules, you're in. Let your talents take you as far as you can. Now, you're in legally, you're in abiding by the law, and it was the assumption that we would actually secure our borders and our commerce. So the other side of that coin is, yeah, we don't need to be doing nonsense like sanctuary cities or telling the federal government, we're going to not abide by law and we're not going to secure ourselves. All of that is a package.
So you don't like the idea of sanctuary cities. For example, if Oklahoma City was a sanctuary city, you'd be opposed to that.
I am, because for the government to work, we have to have respect for our laws and institutions. If we reduce ourselves to mob rule, we're done. If I say, okay, I don't like this, so therefore, the people have spoken. Okay, sometimes people speak in a direction that it takes us. I don't want to go, and I'm like, I think that's going to be really harmful for our state or harmful for our country, depending upon what the elections are. But that doesn't mean that I then commit felonies and I commit illegal acts and I trash our law enforcement and I burn American flags in the streets and I go out and I shout and I disrupt and I throw chairs through, the Oklahoman windows because I don't like something that was written. We cannot become that type of country. We have to have respect for one another, and we have to have respect for our institutions, or it's all done. It's all over.
Chatting here with U.S. Representative Steve Russell. One last thing.
You bet.
I saw you on, it was just amazing TV earlier this week, the questioning of Agent Peter Strzok
Yes.
on the Russian investigation. Your thoughts on how that went? You were pretty adamant in your 5 minutes.
Well, I was. By the time I got a chance to ask my questions and to make my statements, it was pretty late in the game, but it was fascinating. 10 hours. But there was a lot of untruth that was being portrayed there, namely that the IG report said that there was no bias found by the investigators. That's not true. It said there was no bias found with the decisions of the prosecutors. Big difference. And when we had Inspector General Horowitz in an earlier briefing to talk about the report, I made that distinction, and he certainly made the distinction in the report. And I asked him, I said, okay, you've been a prosecutor, Inspector Horowitz. I said, what, if you had bias investigative evidence come to you, could you, without bias, make a poor decision? And he said, yes, it's possible. And so what I tried to do with my questions to Mr. Strzok were, say, okay, you're here claiming that there was no bias found in the report. Let me quote to you a couple of things. And I quoted the provisions in the report that said he personally was found to be biased, and that they did conclude that his actions in the case of the Anthony Weiner laptop did show bias. And I reconnected him with that truth. And then the other one was, he tried to sit there, and this is where he didn't get the congressman that day. He got the colonel that day, because he was trying to portray himself as someone under an oath who was a Boy Scout, who had done nothing wrong and upheld the highest ethical standards of the FBI. And I simply quoted from those FBI policy and ethics handbooks, and I quoted from the Department of Justice handbooks, comparing what they stated with what his actions were on his extramarital affair, what his actions were on showing political bias and the like, and it contradicted all of the things that I quoted in those questions. Did I allow him to try to gain the upper hand to interrupt, as he had done many of my colleagues? I did not. Like I said, I gave him the colonel that day instead of the congressman, and it wasn't to be cruel. I wasn't uncivilized or ungentlemanly. Look, I've done terrible things in my life as a soldier. I'd stay away from that as much as possible now that I'm in peaceful pursuits. So I wasn't unkind, but I was direct, and I did lay it out so that America, and I have strong faith in the American people, you give them the facts, both sides, they're smart enough to come to their own conclusions.
U.S. Representative Steve Russell, we'll leave it right there. One last question for you. Your thoughts on downtown Oklahoma City construction?
Construction is good. Trying to get parking is not. Driving. I would much rather see construction than to see dilapidation. So Oklahoma enjoys good prosperity. Hopefully we're smart enough to continue to be busy little bees and work hard and not become lethargic and continue to move our state in a positive direction. We're seeing a lot of that. In fact, just a couple of quick facts. We have a booming economy right now just in Oklahoma with our tax laws that we've been able to put in place. The average Oklahoman, Dave, got a $1,072 increase in take-home pay under the Jobs Act. The average increase in take-home pay per family in Oklahoma was nearly $2,000, with 1,961. Companies all across our state have been giving bonuses and benefits and retirement packages, so many wonderful things that have happened. Oklahoma also received more than $14 million to help combat the opioid crisis, directly pushed to the state. We have a lot of concern about that. We're strengthening our military. 53,540 veterans just in the 5th district have benefited with a lot of the provisions that we've done in the defense authorization and with our new VA bills. So there's a lot of good that's happening. You just don't always hear about it, but we are trying to work in positive directions, and people in Oklahoma are feeling it, whether they, realize that it was something connected to those guys in Washington or gals in
Wait a
Washington.
minute, it's that Jobs Act.
Yeah, that's right.
As always, we appreciate your time today, sir. Thanks for the Q&A. Appreciate that.
No, my pleasure.
Have fun here in Oklahoma for the weekend. And
Great to be home.
And safe travels
Try to stay
as always,
cool.
sir.
That's right. Thank you.